In 1742, a Prussian botanist named Johann Beckmann documented something in his agricultural journals that modern farming has never been able to adequately explain away. He had been visiting the private estates of German landowners who were, by any economic measure of the time, generating extraordinary returns from relatively small plots of managed land. Not through grain, not through livestock, through what he described as perennial cultivation, the deliberate, systematic planting of crops that required no annual replanting, no annual soil disturbance, no annual seed investment, and yet produced yields that increased year after year as the root systems deepened and the biology of the soil responded. He wrote, "The annual farmer exhausts his land for the sake of a harvest. The perennial cultivator builds his land for the sake of a legacy. One is a transaction, the other is an inheritance." He wrote that in 1742, the industrial farming system that replaced everything Beckmann documented has spent 250 years teaching you to think in seasons, to plant in spring, harvest in summer, till in autumn, and start over. Every single year, buying new seeds every year, disturbing your soil every year, starting from zero every year. Subscribe to Seed Time Botanics right now before we go a single second further. Every week on this channel, we excavate botanical knowledge that the industrial food system has had a 200-year head start on burying. This video is one of the most important ones we have made. Hit subscribe, tap the notification bell, and share this immediately with someone who has a patch of ground and does not yet understand what it is capable of. Then stay with us, because the first plant we are going to show you has been growing in backyards across America for a century, and almost nobody is using it correctly. The system we are going to rebuild today does not start over. It compounds. Plants that you put in the ground once and harvest from for 5, 10, 20, 30 years without ever replanting. Roots that go deeper every season and produce more abundantly with less input as they age. A financial model from your garden that behaves less like a crop cycle and more like a dividend-paying investment that improves its returns the longer you hold it. The Paris market gardeners built six-figure incomes from a system of annual intensive production. What we are going to show you today is something older, something that those same market gardeners had as the backbone of their operations, and that no one in modern horticulture has bothered to teach you. The perennial income system. By the time this video is over, you will know exactly which plants to put in the ground this season. Plants that will still be generating income and replacing your grocery bill when your children are grown. You will know the economics, the planting strategy, the harvest calendar, and the reason this system was dismantled as thoroughly and deliberately as it was. Stay with us, because this is the most financially significant piece of botanical knowledge on this channel. And it begins with something that has been growing outside your window your entire life. Before the 20th century restructured the entire logic of food production, every serious kitchen garden in Europe and North America operated on a dual-layer system. The annual layer was the top layer, the vegetables you replanted each year, the crops you rotated, the beds you managed seasonally. This is what most modern gardeners know and do. It is productive, it is necessary, and it is also the most labor-intensive, most input-dependent, most expensive to maintain layer of the system. Beneath it, structurally and financially, was the perennial layer, the plants that nobody replanted, the plants that simply returned, that deepened, that spread slowly and productively across the borders of the garden without ever demanding seed money, without ever requiring soil disturbance, without ever starting over. These plants were not secondary to the garden's income. They were its foundation. An asparagus bed, properly established, produces for 20 to 30 years. A planting made once, harvested for 3 decades. The labor cost after establishment is almost nothing. A seasonal mulch, a winter cutback, the physical act of harvesting. No digging, no replanting, no seed investment. Just yield, year after year, compounding in abundance as the root crown expands. An established rhubarb crown grows larger every year. A 3-year-old crown produces more than a 2-year-old. A 10-year-old crown produces more than a 5-year-old. The plant rewards time. It rewards patience with perpetually increasing output from the same ground it has always occupied. And every few years, it can be divided. 1 crown becomes 2, 2 become 4. Each division either planted to expand production or sold as planting stock. A Jerusalem artichoke patch, planted once from a handful of tubers, becomes a permanent food source. It spreads. It deepens. It produces edible tubers with no further intervention. It is almost impossible to remove once established, which tells you something about the survival architecture of a plant that has been feeding human populations for thousands of years. An established fruit tree is the most extreme example of the perennial income principle. The labor of the establishment is front-loaded. The payoff stretches across decades. A mature apple tree of the right variety in the right location can produce 500 pounds of fruit in a single season. From one planting, performed once, by hands that may not even be alive anymore by the time the tree reaches full production. The old kitchen gardens understood this. They were not purely annual operations. They were multi-year investments in permanent biological infrastructure that reduced the cost of feeding a family or running a market operation every single year, compounding that reduction as the perennial layer aged. Then the 20th century arrived, and it brought with it a mindset that the industrial system has never stopped promoting. That annual is normal, that perennial is specialty, that starting over every year is simply how gardening works. It is not how gardening works. It is how purchasing inputs works. And input companies have a very specific financial interest in you believing the two are the same thing. Consider what happens when a family establishes a serious perennial layer in their garden. They buy seed once or planting stock once. After that, they buy almost nothing for that portion of their food production. No seeds, no fertilizer specific to those beds. A perennial with a deep root system draws its own nutrition from soil layers an annual plant will never reach. No soil disturbance, which means the soil biology remains intact and self-reinforcing rather than being disrupted and reset every spring. A garden with a serious perennial layer is, over a 10-year horizon, significantly cheaper to run and significantly more productive per labor hour than an annual-only system. The seed industry does not benefit from you knowing this. The fertilizer industry does not benefit from you knowing this. The annual flower and vegetable transplant market, a multi-billion-dollar industry, depends almost entirely on you not knowing this. The perennial system was not abandoned because it failed. It was abandoned because it succeeded too well at making the gardener independent. The perennial income system, as we are rebuilding it today, has 4 structural pillars. Each one delivers a different kind of value. Together, they create a garden that generates food and income from every layer of the growing space, in every season, from plantings you made years ago. Pillar 1. The perennial vegetables. These are the workhorses. The plants that go into the ground once and produce edible harvests for years without reestablishment. Asparagus is the archetype. Plant crowns in year 1, harvest lightly in year 2, and from year 3 onward harvest freely for 20 years or more. Asparagus at farmers markets commands $3 to $5 per pound. An established 30-foot asparagus bed produces 30 to 50 pounds of spears per season at peak maturity. That is a single bed, planted once, generating $100 to $250 per year from nothing but the original labor of the establishment. Add rhubarb alongside it. Rhubarb is virtually indestructible once established, requires no pest management, tolerates neglect, and produces stalks that command premium prices at market because nobody grows it in sufficient quantities anymore. The demand exists. The supply is thin. A mature rhubarb patch of 6 crowns can produce 40 to 60 pounds of usable stock per season. At $2 to $3 per pound at market, That is $100 from 6 plants that cost you almost nothing to maintain. Add Jerusalem artichoke, lovage, sorrel, sea kale, Turkish rocket, and Egyptian walking onions to this category. These are the true perennial vegetables, plants that produce food year after year from established root systems, that require minimal maintenance, and that most of your customers and neighbors have never eaten and therefore find genuinely novel and worth paying for. Pillar 2. The perennial herbs. Herbs are the highest margin crop available to a small-scale grower. The input cost is almost nothing. The output value per square foot is higher than almost any vegetable. And perennial herbs, the ones that return every year and expand their production with age, combine that high margin with the compounding value of the perennial system. Thyme, rosemary, sage, oregano, tarragon, lovage, mint, lemon balm, chives, and horseradish are all perennials in most temperate climates. Plant them once. They return, expand, and provide harvestable material every year. A 10-foot row of established thyme provides enough fresh and dried herb to supply a restaurant account indefinitely. A mint patch, contained to prevent spreading, is essentially a permanent herb production unit that requires nothing but occasional division and a trim. The economics of perennial herb production are compelling. Fresh culinary herbs at farmers market sell for $2 to $3 per small bunch. A well-managed herb bed of 10 perennial varieties can produce weekly market quantities throughout the growing season with total annual labor measured in hours rather than days. Dried herbs command even higher margins. Dried lavender, dried rosemary, dried lemon balm, dried chamomile flower. The processing is simple. The shelf life is long. The customer base is broad. Pillar 3. The fruit layer. Fruit is the long game within the perennial system. The establishment period is the longest. The payoff is the largest. Soft fruit is the entry point. Strawberries produce in their first year from runners, multiply freely, and can be managed as a permanent bed that is refreshed from its own runners every 3 years without purchasing new plants. A 20-foot strawberry bed produces 15 to 30 pounds of fruit per season at its peak, commanding $4 to $6 per pint at direct market. That is $200 to $400 from one bed that regenerates itself indefinitely. Raspberries and blackberries are the medium-term investment. They take 2 years to establish and then produce abundantly for 15 to 20 years with minimal management beyond an annual cane cut. A 10-foot raspberry row at peak production yields 8 to 15 pounds of fruit per season. At $5 to $8 per pint at direct market, the financial return per square foot rivals almost anything else in the garden. Currants, black, red, and white, are chronically underplanted in American gardens despite producing reliably, requiring almost no maintenance, tolerating partial shade, and commanding extraordinary prices at farmers markets and to restaurant buyers who cannot source them reliably from any other channel. A mature black currant bush produces 8 to 12 pounds of fruit per year. At $8 to $12 per pound for black currant at specialty and restaurant pricing, a single mature bush generates $60 to $150 annually. From one plant, planted once. Tree fruit is the horizon planting. The apple, the pear, the plum, the fig, the mulberry. You plant these not primarily for yourself, but for the compounding value they represent over time. A mature apple tree at peak production yields 2 to 500 pounds of fruit. Sold as processed product, dried, juiced, made into preserves, rather than fresh. The margin per pound increases significantly, and the storage period extends the selling window from weeks to months. Pillar 4. The medicinal and specialty layer. This is the pillar that most income-focused perennial guides omit, and that represents the highest margin opportunity in the system. Medicinal perennials grown for the botanical wellness market command prices that food crops do not approach. Dried echinacea root from established plants sells at $15 to $30 per pound dried weight. Dried valerian root at $8 to to $15 per pound. Elderflower and elderberry from established shrubs at $12 to $20 per pound dried. Dried calendula flower at $12 to $18 per pound. Dried chamomile flower at $10 to $16 per pound. These are not difficult to grow. They are perennial or self-seeding, which means establishment is a one-time investment. They require no refrigeration for transport or sale because the medicinal value is in the dried product. They serve the botanical wellness market that your channel, Seedtime Botanics, is already building a relationship with. The audience you are cultivating through your educational content is exactly the audience that will buy medicinal dried herbs from a grower they trust. That alignment between content audience and market customer is not a coincidence. It is the business model that makes the perennial income system work at its highest level. The seed industry, the fertilizer industry, and the industrial annual transplant market depend on you not knowing about this system. Not because they sat in a room and decided to hide it. Because the system's success makes them structurally unnecessary. A gardener with a serious perennial layer is a customer who gradually stops buying what they sell. Subscribe to Seedtime Botanics right now. Share this video because there is someone in your network whose grocery bill is climbing every month and whose ground they do not know how to make productive. This system is the answer. Hit subscribe, share this, and stay with us, because we are about to get specific about the numbers. Let us be specific, because specificity is what separates information from actionable knowledge, and actionable knowledge is the only kind that changes your situation. A serious perennial income system on a quarter-acre operates across 3 financial functions simultaneously. It replaces grocery spending, which is a dollar-for-dollar return on every pound of food produced. It generates direct market income from surplus, and it builds biological capital in the ground that increases in value every year without any additional investment. Let's look at the replacement economics first, because this is what most growers underestimate. The average American family spends between $10,000 and $15,000 per year on food. A significant portion of that spending goes to produce herbs, fruit, and specialty items that a perennial garden can provide completely. Conservative estimates from growers operating in mid-size American cities put the annual grocery replacement value of a well-managed perennial quarter-acre at $3,000 to $6,000 per year once the system reaches maturity at year 3 or 4. That $3,000 to $6,000 does not require selling anything. It does not require a farmer's market account, a CSA operation, or a restaurant buyer. It requires growing what your family consumes and consuming what you grow. That is a baseline financial return available to anyone with a quarter-acre and the willingness to establish the system once. Now let us look at the selling economics. A single established asparagus bed, 30 feet long, at peak production generates 40 to 60 pounds of spears per season. At farmers market pricing of $3 to $5 per pound, that is $120 to $300 from one bed. The bed was planted once. The annual labor is 30 to 45 minutes of mulching and cutback. The seed or crown investment was made once, 3 years before the harvest began. A mature black currant planting of 8 bushes, occupying roughly 200 square feet of garden space, produces 60 to 96 pounds of fruit at peak maturity. At specialty market pricing of $8 to $12 per pound, that is $480 to $1,150 annually. From 200 square feet, planted once. A medicinal herb bed of 12 perennial varieties, totaling 150 square feet, produces dried material worth, at conservative mid-range pricing, $800 to $1,400 per year once established. The labor is harvesting and drying. The plants ask for almost nothing else. Now add those 3 examples together. 1 asparagus bed, 8 currant bushes, 1 medicinal herb area. Total ground occupied, approximately 450 square feet, less than 1/10 of a quarter-acre. Combined conservative annual income, $1,400 to $2,900. From 450 square feet. Planted once. Scale that across a full quarter acre with the full 4-pillar system operational and the income potential in year 5, when the tree fruit is beginning to produce, when the perennial vegetables are at full root development, when the medicinal layer is established and the herb beds are dense and mature, is substantial. Growers operating this model in documented cases across the United States and Canada report annual values between $8,000 and $20,000 from quarter-acre perennial operations, with the lower end representing households that grow primarily for family use and the higher end representing those who sell through direct channels. The critical number to understand is the year-on-year trajectory. In an annual system, your income from the garden is roughly the same every year because you start over every year. In a perennial system, year 3 produces more than year 2. Year 5 produces more than year 3. Year 10 produces more than year 5. The system compounds. The plants deepen. The root systems expand. The biology of the soil, undisturbed by annual tilling, develops in ways that increase fertility and water retention every single year without additional inputs. This is what Beckman was documenting in 1742. This is what the industrial system replaced with something cheaper at continental scale, but impoverishing at individual scale. The math at the level of one family, 1/4 acre, across a 10-year horizon, is unambiguous. Perennial income compounds. Annual income resets. Every year you delay establishing the perennial layer is a year of compounding you have lost. The best time to plant an asparagus crown was 3 years ago. The second best time is this season. Let us be practical. The system we have described sounds large because it is large over a 10-year horizon. But the entry point is modest, and the first year is specifically about foundation, not production. Year 1, the infrastructure year. Do not try to establish every pillar in year 1. The gardeners who fail with perennial systems almost always fail because they planted everything at once, managed nothing well, and lost confidence when the first-year harvests were light. First-year harvests are always light. That is not failure. That is biology doing exactly what it is supposed to do, investing in root development rather than surface production. In year 1, choose one representative plant from each pillar and establish it properly. One asparagus bed. One established herb planting of 5 to 7 perennial varieties. One soft fruit establishment, a raspberry row or a strawberry bed. One medicinal planting of 3 to 4 species. That is your perennial foundation. Prepare the ground for these plantings with compost and real soil depth. A perennial plant is going to live in this specific location for 10 to 30 years. The investment of preparation is an investment in a decade of returns. Double the compost you think is necessary. Work the soil deeper than you think is required. The root system you are about to place in that ground is going to reward the preparation exponentially. Total first-year planting cost for a serious perennial foundation, $200 to $400. That is the entire investment for a system that will be producing for 20 years. Year 2, the patience year. Year 2 is the year most gardeners are tempted to give up on the perennial system. The asparagus is sending up beautiful ferny growth, but you cannot harvest it yet. You must let the root system develop fully. The currant bushes are establishing. The raspberry canes are growing, but not producing abundantly. The medicinal herbs are developing. The impulse is to judge the system by year 2 production, which is minimal. The correct judgment is by what year 2 root development means for year 3 and year 4 production. A year 2 asparagus crown has roots extending 18 to 24 inches into the soil. Those roots are the capital being deposited into an account you cannot withdraw from yet, but that will compound every year from year 3 onward. In year 2, expand the annual intensive layer alongside the perennial foundation. This is where the French intensive succession methods described in our earlier videos pay immediately while the perennial layer matures. The two systems complement each other perfectly. Annual income from intensive succession planting bridges the establishment period of the perennial system. Year 3 and beyond, The harvest years. Year 3 is when the perennial system begins to pay. The asparagus crowns are ready for harvest. The raspberry canes are producing their first serious flush. The herb beds are dense and can be harvested multiple times through the season without damage to the plants. The medicinal layer is established and producing dryable material. From year 3 onward, the system's primary labor is harvest, not establishment. The maintenance required per bed is a fraction of what an annual bed demands. Mulching, occasional division of overcrowded plants, removal of dead material at season's end. The biology of the soil is running itself. The root systems are feeding themselves from soil layers that no annual crop reaches. And in year 3, you begin the expansion cycle. Divide your rhubarb and replant the divisions. Split overgrown clumps of chives and lemon balm. Layer your blackcurrant stems to produce new plants from the existing ones. Take runners from your strawberry beds to extend the planting. Every division and layer is either planted to increase your production footprint or sold as planting stock. An established perennial planting stock commands serious market prices. A 3-year-old asparagus crown division sells for $3 to $5 per crown. A well-rooted blackcurrant layer from an established bush sells for $8 to $15. You are not just selling produce. You are selling pieces of the system itself to other growers who want to start where you are now. The market strategy. The perennial income system's financial model works best through direct sales. This is not optional advice. It is structural. The crops that perennial gardens produce best: asparagus, fresh berries, culinary and medicinal herbs, specialty vegetables nobody else is growing, are exactly the crops that command the highest premiums at direct sales channels and the worst prices at wholesale. A farmer's market presence for specialty perennial produce: asparagus in spring, herbs through summer, berries through July and August, dried medicinals in autumn and winter, creates a year-round customer relationship that no grocery store can replicate. Your customers are not buying asparagus. They are buying your asparagus, harvested this morning, from ground you have been building for 3 years. A CSA model layered onto a perennial system is powerful in a specific way. Your perennial crops provide the premium anchor items in every weekly box. Asparagus in the box in May when the only other source is a grocery store that flew it in from Peru. Berries in July that your CSA members have never tasted at this quality. Dried herb bundles in November that nobody else in your local market is offering. Restaurant accounts for specialty perennial produce are the third channel. A restaurant buyer who can access fresh, say-morning harvested sorrel, sea kale, lovage, or blackcurrant through a direct relationship with a grower is a buyer who will pay 3 to 4 times wholesale price and maintain that relationship indefinitely. These crops are not available from wholesale distributors in most markets. The restaurant comes to you because you are the only available source. $3 to $5 per pound for asparagus you planted once. $8 to $12 per pound for blackcurrant from a bush you established 3 years ago. A CSA customer list that renews every season because nobody else in your market can offer what a mature perennial system produces. This is not theoretical. This is documented from growers operating right now in every region of this country. Subscribe to Seedtime Botanics right now if you have not already. And share this video with one person in your life who is paying grocery prices that are climbing every year on produce that was grown on the other side of the country. The system is here. The knowledge is here. The ground is waiting. Subscribe and stay close, because the most important section of this video is the last one. Sit with this for a moment. The industrial food system that replaced the perennial kitchen garden model did not replace it because it fed families better. It replaced it because it fed cities more conveniently, and because it created a commercial infrastructure that generates revenue from every stage of the food production process. Inputs sold to the farmer, logistics charged to move the product, retail markup applied at the point of sale. A family with a mature perennial system exits that commercial infrastructure at multiple points simultaneously. They do not buy the seeds for their perennial crops because the plants regenerate. They do not buy synthetic fertilizer for their deep-rooted perennials because the plants are mining their own nutrition from soil layers annual fertilizer does not reach. They are not dependent on a supply chain for asparagus in May or berries in July because both are 30 feet from their kitchen door. This is not a small thing. Food prices have risen 40% in the last 4 years in the United States. Supply chain disruptions have made groceries inconsistently available in ways that were considered impossible a decade ago. The cost of eating the way most families want to eat is increasing at a rate that wages are not matching. A perennial income system is not an insurance policy against these trends. It is an exit from their logic entirely. You are not protected from food inflation by a perennial garden. You are simply no longer paying food inflation for the portion of your diet that your garden provides. And there is something that goes beyond the financial. Something that every serious practitioner of perennial cultivation eventually describes, and that is difficult to put into language that does not sound romantic, but that is, in fact, biological. When you stop disturbing soil annually, the biology of that soil changes. Fungal networks develop that do not exist in tilled ground. Mycelial connections between plant root systems that transfer nutrients and chemical signals between plants in ways that plant science is only now beginning to document. The soil ecosystem in a perennial bed that has been undisturbed for 5 years is categorically different from the soil in an annual bed. Richer, more biologically active, more capable of buffering drought and waterlogging, more able to suppress disease and pest pressure without intervention. The plants respond to this. Asparagus from a mature, biologically rich bed has a flavor that asparagus from commercial production does not approach. Berries from a mycorrhizally connected root system in undisturbed perennial ground have a sweetness and complexity that the same variety grown in annual turnover soil does not produce. Your customers will notice this before they understand it. They will come back to your market stall not because they have analyzed the soil biology, but because what you are selling tastes like something they forgot food was supposed to taste like. Beckman documented this in 1742. The market gardeners of Paris knew it. The old kitchen garden manuals describe it without having the language to explain it mechanistically. The biology is now understood well enough that the mechanism can be named. The mycorrhizal network. The undisturbed soil food web. The chemistry of plants grown in biologically complete ground has not been reset by tilling in years. Year 1, you are planting. Year 2, you are waiting with intention. Year 3, you are harvesting the first returns. Year 5, the system is running. Year 10, you have a quarter acre that has become, through the patient accumulation of biological capital, a genuinely extraordinary piece of ground. It produces more than it should. It costs less than it should. It tastes better than it should, because it has been allowed to do what perennial systems do when nobody interferes with them. Compound. 10 years from now, food prices will be higher. Supply chains will have had more disruptions. More families will be calculating what grocery inflation means for their monthly budget. You will walk out to your beds in the early morning and harvest asparagus that has been returning for 7 years. Pick berries from canes that have been in the ground since the year you started. Cut herbs from a medicinal bed that has never been replanted, and understand in a way that is hard to put into words why Beckman wrote what he wrote in 1742. One is a transaction. The other is an inheritance. The perennial system was set aside not because it failed, but because it made the grower independent. The knowledge is here. The ground beneath your feet is waiting. The only thing left is to plant it once and let it compound. Before you close this video, 3 questions in the comments, and we want real answers. First, do you currently have any perennial food plants already established in your garden? Asparagus, fruit trees, established herbs, berry canes, rhubarb, anything. Tell us what you have and how old it is. because we want to understand the baseline your community is starting from. Second, what is the one perennial plant from this video that you are going to establish this season? Not eventually. This season. Tell us what it is, and we will reply with specific planting guidance for your region. Third, share this video with someone whose grocery bill is climbing. Not someone who gardens. Someone who eats. Because the perennial income system solves a problem that people are feeling right now in every supermarket queue in the country, and the solution has been growing quietly in kitchen gardens since before Beckman wrote it down. Subscribe to Seedtime Botanics. Share this. Come back next week. The knowledge has always been here. We are just making sure it reaches the people who need it.